Summer, 1974, Redondo Beach, California. Building M4 at the TRW Defense and Space Systems Complex sat under the relentless California sun. Inside the steel-reinforced walls, America's most sensitive secrets flowed through encrypted channels. These included satellite surveillance data. There were also Central Intelligence Agency communications. Defense intelligence that could tip the balance of the Cold War was also present. At 21 years old, Christopher John Boyce walked through the security checkpoint for his first day of work. He had dark hair and a lean build. He was a college dropout. His father pulled strings to get him this job. His father, a former Federal Bureau of Investigation agent, made one phone call. That was all it took. Boyce cleared the background check. He got his security badge. He got escorted to his workstation. Within weeks, they would give him something else. He would receive top secret clearance. This gave him access to the Black Vault. He gained access to everything. However, nobody knew yet what would happen. Nobody could possibly have imagined it. This bright young man from a prosperous family in Palos Verdes was about to commit one of the most brazen acts of espionage in Cold War history. The betrayal started almost immediately. This happened the same month he received his clearance. It was the same month America trusted him with its deepest secrets. He was already planning how to sell them to the Soviet Union. Christopher Boyce did not look like a traitor. Born on February 16, 1953, he grew up in the affluent coastal suburbs. This was the Palos Verdes Peninsula. Sprawling homes overlooked the Pacific Ocean there. Families measured success by the size of their properties. His father, Charles Eugene Boyce, worked as a security director for McDonnell Douglas after a career with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His mother raised 9 children in their comfortable home. Young Christopher served as an altar boy at St. John Fisher Catholic Church alongside his childhood friend, Andrew Daulton Lee. They were good boys from good families. They lived in a good neighborhood where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Boyce attended Palos Verdes High School, where he developed 2 consuming passions. The first was falconry. He became obsessed with the ancient art of training birds of prey. He spent hours in the hills with hawks and falcons perched on his leather-gloved arm. He would later say the medieval practice transported him into a different time. It took him away from modern corruption. His second passion was more troubling, however. It was drugs. He started with marijuana, then hashish, and then pills. He drifted through college. First, he enrolled at California Polytechnic State University. Then he dropped out. He tried Loyola University. He dropped out again. By 1974, at age 21, he was directionless. He worked as a bartender and got high regularly. He questioned everything about American society. This was in the wake of Vietnam and Watergate. His father worried. His mother prayed. Then his father made that phone call. The job at TRW seemed perfect for a young man who needed structure. Defense contractors were always hiring. The pay was not spectacular. It was $140 per week. This amounted to $7,280 annually. This was barely enough to cover rent and expenses. However, it was legitimate work with a prestigious company. It was doing important things for national defense. TRW Systems Group in Redondo Beach employed thousands of engineers, technicians, and support staff. They worked on classified aerospace projects. They built satellites. They handled Central Intelligence Agency communications. They were integral to America's intelligence gathering apparatus. When Boyce applied, the background investigation should have been thorough and comprehensive. It should have uncovered his drug use. It should also have revealed his countercultural leanings and his suspicious associations. Instead, the investigators did the bare minimum. They talked to his father. They talked to family friends. They asked about his character. Everyone said he was a good kid. Nobody interviewed his peers. Nobody asked the people who actually knew what he was doing in his spare time. Also, nobody discovered that his best friend, Andrew Daulton Lee, was already a known drug dealer with multiple arrests. The investigators simply checked the boxes. They filed their paperwork. They then cleared him for employment. In the summer of 1974, Christopher Boyce walked into TRW as a new employee in the Classified Communications Center. He started in document control, handling routine paperwork. His supervisors noticed that he was smart, capable, and quick to learn. Within months, they promoted him. They gave him a higher security clearance. They assigned him to the most sensitive area of the facility. This was the Black Vault. The Black Vault was exactly what it sounded like. It was a steel-doored fortress inside Building M4. Only cleared personnel could enter it. Inside those walls, encrypted messages flowed between the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, and covert operatives around the world. Boyce's job was to receive, log, and transmit classified cable traffic. He handled documents marked top secret. He read communications about spy satellite programs. He saw cables discussing Rheolite, an advanced surveillance satellite system that eavesdropped on Soviet missile tests and military communications. He read about Pyrometer, another satellite project in development. He learned about Central Intelligence Agency operations in Australia. There, American intelligence agencies had secretly installed monitoring stations. He discovered cables revealing that the United States was deceiving its Australian allies. It was hiding intelligence it had promised to share. He believed he saw evidence that the Central Intelligence Agency was interfering in Australian elections. Day after day, Boyce sat in the Black Vault reading America's secrets. And day after day, he grew more disillusioned. He convinced himself that his government was corrupt. He believed the Central Intelligence Agency was evil. He felt the whole system deserved to be exposed. He started thinking dangerous thoughts. He wondered what if someone revealed these lies. He considered what if someone showed the world what America was really doing. What if that someone was him? However, exposure alone was not enough. He wanted money as well. He had debts and expensive tastes. His lifestyle was something that $140 per week could not support. The Soviet Union would pay for secrets. Everyone knew this. They had paid other traitors. They would pay him too. He just needed a courier. This would be someone expendable. It would be someone already living outside the law. It would be someone like his old friend, Daulton Lee. Andrew Daulton Lee was the perfect accomplice for all the wrong reasons. Born on January 3rd, 1952, Lee was the adopted son of Dr. Daulton Lee, a prominent physician in Palos Verdes. Like Boyce, he came from privilege and respectability. Like Boyce, he had been an altar boy and model student. Unlike Boyce, he had descended completely into the drug underworld by his early 20s. Lee dealt cocaine and heroin. He used heavily. He had been arrested multiple times. By 1975, he was desperate for money. He needed it to finance his next deals and feed his growing addiction. When Boyce approached him with the espionage proposal, Lee saw only dollar signs. He did not care about politics or ideology. He cared about cash and cocaine. Boyce explained the plan. He would photograph classified documents using a Minix camera. This was the tiny spy camera favored by intelligence services worldwide. Lee would take the film to Mexico City and sell it to the Soviets at their embassy there. They would split the money. It seemed simple. It seemed safe. Mexico City was just a flight away. The Soviet embassy would welcome anyone with American secrets. They would do this a few times, make some money, and then leave. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. However, things did not go wrong right away. At first, the operation worked flawlessly. Boyce started slowly. In late 1974 and early 1975, he began photographing documents. He would wait until the Black Vault was empty, or he waited until his colleagues were distracted. He would pull classified cables from the files. He would spread them on his desk. The Minix camera fit in his palm. Each cartridge held 36 exposures. He photographed satellite specifications. He photographed Central Intelligence Agency communications. He photographed anything that looked important. Sometimes he simply stuffed documents into his jacket, or he slipped them into potted plants to carry them out of the facility. He would later testify that security was a joke. The Black Vault felt more like a private club than a secure facility. People drank Bacardi rum at their desks. They held parties. They used the Code Destruction blender to make banana daiquiris and Mai Tais. In that relaxed atmosphere, stealing America's secrets was almost easy. In early 1975, Lee made his first trip to Mexico City. He walked up to the Soviet embassy on Calzada de Tacubaya. This was a fortified compound. Officers from the Komitet Gosudarbstvenoi Bezopasnosti operated there under diplomatic cover. Mexican police watched the building constantly. Foreign intelligence services monitored everyone who entered and left. Lee did not care. He was young, arrogant, and high on his own sense of invincibility. He told the gate guard he had information to sell. The guard made a phone call. Minutes later, Lee was inside. He was sitting across from a Soviet intelligence officer who introduced himself as Alex. Lee showed him sample photographs. These included documents about American satellite systems. They also contained communications about Central Intelligence Agency operations. Alex studied the images carefully. His face remained neutral, but his eyes betrayed excitement. These were genuine. These were valuable. The Komitet Gosudarbstvenoi Bezopasnosti wanted more. Alex laid out the protocols. Lee would return regularly with new material. They would meet at the embassy or at designated locations around the city. The Soviets would pay in cash. This was in dollars, not rubles. They toasted the arrangement with vodka and caviar. Alex raised his glass and spoke of peace. Lee flew back to California with $1,500 in his pocket. He also had instructions for the next delivery. The espionage partnership was operational. Over the next 18 months, Christopher Boyce stole thousands of pages of classified documents from TRW. He photographed satellite schematics. He copied cable traffic from the Central Intelligence Agency. He provided intelligence about Rhyolite satellites. This gave the Soviets a detailed understanding of America's surveillance capabilities. The documents revealed orbital paths, signal frequencies, decryption methods, and operational procedures. Each piece of information helped the Soviet Union understand how America was watching them. It also showed them how to avoid detection. Each photograph represented a breach of national security. Each delivery to the Komitet Gosudarbstvenoi Bezopasnosti strengthened the enemy's hand in the Cold War. Boyce worked methodically. He developed a system. He identified documents that would interest the Soviets. He photographed them during slow periods in the Black Vault. He passed the film cartridges to Lee. Sometimes this happened at Lee's apartment. Sometimes it occurred at prearranged meeting spots around Los Angeles. Lee handled the Mexico City runs. He flew south every few weeks. Sometimes he taped an X on designated lampposts to signal his Komitet Gosudarbstvenoi Bezopasnosti handlers that he wanted a meeting. Sometimes he showed up at the embassy directly. The Soviets paid well. At first, they paid $1,500 per delivery. Then, payments increased as the quality of the intelligence improved. By mid-1976, payments ranged from $2,000 to $5,000 per trip. Over the entire operation, the Soviets paid approximately $70,000 for the stolen secrets. Boyce received $15,000. Lee kept the rest. He used it to finance his drug deals and fuel his addictions. The arrangement suited them both. Boyce got money and revenge against the government he despised. Lee got cash for cocaine. Neither thought much about the consequences. Neither imagined they would get caught. Neither understood that their partnership was doomed by Lee's recklessness and addiction. Lee could not keep his mouth shut. At parties in Palos Verdes, he bragged about being a spy. He showed friends his Minex camera. He hinted at his connections to the Soviet State Security Committee. Lee acted like James Bond, enjoying the mystique and the danger. People who heard his stories dismissed them as drug-fueled fantasies. Nobody believed that a strung-out dealer from the suburbs was actually working for Soviet intelligence. Lee's KGB handlers grew concerned. They had given him explicit instructions about operational security. These instructions included no bragging, no unnecessary risks, and no deviating from protocols. Lee ignored everything. By late 1976, he was using heroin heavily. His behavior became erratic. He missed scheduled meetings. He also showed up at the Soviet embassy at odd hours, demanding to see his handlers. The KGB wanted to cut him off. However, the intelligence kept flowing. Boyce continued providing documents. As long as the material remained valuable, the KGB would tolerate Lee's dysfunction. Then came January 6, 1977. Lee flew to Mexico City, desperate for money. He needed cash for a heroin deal. He had been using heavily, and his funds were depleted. He went to the Soviet embassy unannounced, outside the scheduled meeting times. This violated every security protocol. He stood outside the compound gates, acting nervous and suspicious. Mexican police officers patrolling the area noticed him immediately. Foreign nationals loitering near the Soviet embassy always drew attention. The officers approached him. Lee panicked. They asked for identification. He reached into his jacket. The officers grabbed him, and a struggle ensued. In the scuffle, an envelope fell from his clothes. It landed on the sidewalk, and documents spilled out. These documents included photographs and microfilm. The officers picked them up and immediately saw that something was wrong. These were not tourist photos or personal correspondence. Instead, these were technical diagrams. They were marked with classifications. These were spy materials. The Mexican police arrested Lee on the spot. In an interrogation room at Mexican police headquarters, Andrew Daulton Lee faced a choice. He could cooperate or face serious charges in Mexico. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He had been caught red-handed with classified American documents outside the Soviet embassy. The Mexicans wanted answers, so Lee started talking. He told them about Christopher Boyce. He identified his accomplice by name. He explained the entire operation. This included the TRW job, the Black Vault, the stolen documents, and the KGB payments. The Mexican authorities immediately contacted American officials. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was notified. A traitor was operating inside one of America's most sensitive defense contractors. The target had a name: Christopher Boyce. Within hours, Federal Bureau of Investigation agents mobilized in California. They opened a counterintelligence investigation. They obtained warrants. They began surveillance. On January 16, 1977, just 10 days after Lee's arrest, Federal Bureau of Investigation agents approached Christopher Boyce. He was returning from a Falcon trapping trip in the mountains. Boyce had been away for days, unaware that his partner had been captured and had betrayed him. The agents identified themselves. They asked him to come to the federal building in Los Angeles for questioning. Boyce knew immediately that it was over. The espionage operation had collapsed. His friend had talked. Everything was about to come apart. He went with the agents without resisting. In the interrogation room, Boyce initially denied everything. However, the evidence overwhelmed him. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had Lee's confession. They also had the documents recovered in Mexico City. Furthermore, they had proof of the bank deposits and cash transactions. Boyce eventually admitted his role. He confessed to photographing classified documents. He acknowledged passing them to Lee for delivery to the Soviets. He tried to explain his motivations. He talked about Watergate and Vietnam. He mentioned Australian democracy and Central Intelligence Agency lies. The Federal Bureau of Investigation agents listened without sympathy. Political ideology did not excuse treason. On January 17, 1977, Christopher John Boyce was formally arrested and charged with espionage. The charges were severe. These included conspiracy to commit espionage. He was also charged with unauthorized possession of classified documents. Finally, he faced charges of selling national defense information to a foreign power. Each count carried decades in prison. His bail was set impossibly high. He was held in federal custody awaiting trial. The golden boy from Palos Verdes, the young man with every advantage, now faced life behind bars. The Federal Bureau of Investigation expanded rapidly after Boyce's arrest. Agents descended on TRW's Redondo Beach facility. They interviewed his supervisors and coworkers. They reviewed security logs and access records. They tried to determine exactly what had been compromised. The picture that emerged was devastating. Boyce had accessed thousands of classified documents over nearly 3 years. He had photographed satellite specifications for the Rhyolite system. This was one of America's most sophisticated surveillance platforms. He had stolen communications, revealing Central Intelligence Agency operations worldwide. He had provided details about cryptographic systems and secure communication protocols. Each document represented a breach. Each photograph gave the Soviet Union insight into American capabilities. Intelligence officials worked frantically to assess the damage. They questioned how much the Soviets had learned. They also wondered how badly American operations were compromised. They needed to know if any of the damage could be reversed. The answers were grim. The Rhyolite satellite system was partially compromised. The Soviets now understood how America monitored their missile tests and military communications. They could take countermeasures. They could change frequencies and encryption methods. Years of intelligence work were potentially undone. Billions of dollars in satellite technology were partially neutralized. Central Intelligence Agency operations mentioned in the stolen cables had to be reviewed and possibly terminated. Sources might be exposed. Agents might be at risk. The damage assessment took months and revealed a catastrophic security failure. One 21-year-old with a Minix camera had done what Soviet intelligence agencies dreamed of accomplishing through elaborate spy networks. He had done it because nobody had properly vetted him before giving him access to America's crown jewels. The trials of Christopher Boyce and Daulton Lee became national sensations. The government faced a delicate challenge. Prosecutors wanted maximum sentences. These men had betrayed their country and aided the enemy during the Cold War. However, revealing the full extent of the damage in open court risked further compromising national security. Every classified document introduced as evidence had to be carefully sanitized. Every witness had to avoid mentioning programs and operations that remained active. The Carter administration made clear its position. If the trials threatened ongoing intelligence operations, they would be shut down. This would happen regardless of the consequences for prosecution. The Justice Department developed a strategy. They decided to focus on the Pyramiter satellite documents found on Lee in Mexico City. Pyramiter was a system that never actually became operational. Therefore, discussing it in court would not compromise current programs. The strategy involved using enough other evidence to establish the pattern of espionage. This would be done without revealing the most sensitive details. They aimed to make the trials about betrayal and greed rather than the specific intelligence that was lost. The approach worked. Boyce and Lee were tried separately. Lee went first in April 1977. The government presented Mexican police officers who testified about his arrest outside the Soviet embassy. Federal Bureau of Investigation agents described the documents recovered from him. Prosecutors showed photographs of classified TRW materials found in Lee's possession. The Minix camera that produced the spy photographs was entered into evidence. Lee's defense attorney argued that his client had been manipulated by Boyce. He claimed Lee believed he was helping the Central Intelligence Agency, not betraying it. He suggested Boyce had told Lee the documents were disinformation intended to deceive the Soviets. The jury did not believe it. Too much evidence pointed to willing participation. This included the cash payments and the repeated trips to Mexico City. The spy camera and the lies also pointed to his guilt. On May 14, 1977, after deliberating less than 1 day, the jury convicted Daulton Lee on 8 counts of espionage. Judge Robert J. Kelleher set sentencing for July. Lee's parents sat in the courtroom weeping as their adopted son was led away in handcuffs. The boy they had raised in wealth and privilege was now a convicted traitor facing life in prison. Christopher Boyce's trial began 2 weeks later. The evidence against him was even more overwhelming. Prosecutors called TRW employees who testified about Boyce's access to classified documents. They presented security logs showing which files he had reviewed. They introduced stolen documents with his fingerprints on them. Federal Bureau of Investigation forensic specialists testified that microfilm recovered from Lee had been photographed inside the TRW Black Vault. Former co-workers described Boyce's radical political views and his frequent criticism of the Central Intelligence Agency. The prosecution painted him as an ideologue. They claimed he had betrayed his country out of misguided anger over government policies. Assistant United States Attorney Joel Levine told the jury that Boyce had sold out America's secrets to the Soviet Union. He reminded them that the Soviet Union was the nation's primary Cold War adversary. These were not harmless leaks to the press, Levine argued. These were direct transmissions of classified intelligence to enemy agents who would use it against American interests. The defense countered that Boyce had been blackmailed by Lee. His attorney claimed Lee had threatened to expose a letter Boyce had written while under the influence of hashish. This letter made wild accusations about Central Intelligence Agency crimes. Boyce took the stand in his own defense. He admitted photographing documents. He confirmed passing them to Lee. However, he claimed he had done so under duress, coerced by his drug-dealing friend. The prosecution destroyed his credibility on cross-examination. If he was being blackmailed, they asked, why had he accepted money? If he was acting under duress, why did the espionage continue for more than 1 year? Why did he not report Lee to authorities? Why did he not tell his Federal Bureau of Investigation, Agent Father? Boyce had no good answers. The jury saw through his story. On April 28, 1977, they convicted him on 8 counts of espionage. He stood motionless as the verdict was read. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 8 times guilty. His parents collapsed in tears. His father, the former Federal Bureau of Investigation agent who had helped him get the TRW job, sat stunned. His son was led away to await sentencing. The trials were over. The convictions were secured. Now came punishment. The sentencing hearings for both men took place during the summer of 1977. Andrew Daulton Lee appeared first. This occurred on July 18th before Judge Robert Kelleher in Los Angeles Federal Court. Prosecutors asked for a life sentence in prison. Lee's attorney pleaded for leniency. He cited his client's youth and his troubled descent into drug addiction. Character witnesses described the promising young man Lee had once been. This was before cocaine and heroin destroyed his judgment. Judge Kelleher listened impassively. When the testimony concluded, he delivered his decision. Lee had committed one of the most serious crimes imaginable. He had sold his country's secrets to a foreign power for money. His drug addiction did not excuse his treason. His youth did not diminish his guilt. The court sentenced Andrew Daulton Lee to life imprisonment in federal prison. He would be eligible for parole only after serving a substantial portion of that sentence. Marshals then led him away. His espionage career had lasted less than 2 years. His prison sentence would consume decades. Christopher Boyce's sentencing followed on September 12, 1977. Prosecutors outlined the scope of his betrayal. He had provided the Soviets with intelligence about America's most sensitive satellite programs. He had exposed Central Intelligence Agency operations. Furthermore, he had undermined national security during a critical period in the Cold War. Prosecutors asked Judge Kelleher to impose the maximum sentence. Boyce's attorney argued that his client was a misguided idealist. He was not a mercenary traitor like Lee, the attorney claimed. He emphasized Boyce's intellectual curiosity and his legitimate concerns about government misconduct. He asked the judge for mercy. Judge Kelleher addressed Boyce directly. Judge told Boyce he was a young man of exceptional intelligence and privilege. Boyce had every advantage. The judge stated that Boyce betrayed his country not because he was coerced or desperate. Instead, he chose to commit this act. Boyce decided that his judgment was superior to that of elected officials and intelligence professionals. These professionals were charged with protecting American security. The judge concluded that Boyce's actions damaged the nation's defense capabilities and aided its enemies. The court found his conduct reprehensible and his explanations inadequate. Judge Kelleher sentenced Christopher John Boyce to 40 years in federal prison. Boyce would serve his sentence initially at Terminal Island Federal Correctional Institution. Later, he would move to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in San Diego. Finally, he would be transferred to the maximum security Federal Correctional Institution at Lompoc, California. He received 40 years. Boyce was 24 years old at the time. If he served the full sentence, he would be 64 when released. His youth was over. His freedom was gone. The espionage that began so casually in the Black Vault had ended in catastrophic consequences. However, the story of Christopher Boyce's betrayal was not finished. Prison could not contain his rebellious spirit. On the evening of January 21st, 1980, at approximately 6:15 in the evening, guards conducted their routine head count. This occurred at the Lompoc Federal Correctional Institution. Christopher Boyce was missing. A search began immediately. Guards found evidence of his escape route. Boyce had hidden in a drainage hole, waiting until darkness fell. Using wire cutters smuggled by other inmates, he had cut through the chain-link perimeter fence. By the time guards discovered the breach, Boyce had vanished into the California night. The escape triggered one of the most intensive manhunts in Federal Bureau of Investigation history. Boyce was a convicted Soviet spy. Intelligence officials feared he might flee to the Soviet Union. They worried he would provide additional classified information he had memorized during his time at TRW. Every airport and border crossing went on alert. The Federal Bureau of Investigation distributed wanted posters nationwide. Tips flooded in from across the country. None led to Boyce. Months passed and the trail went cold. For 19 months, Christopher Boyce lived as a fugitive. He used the alias Anthony Edward Lester. He survived by robbing banks. Between his escape and recapture, he committed at least 17 bank robberies. These robberies occurred across Idaho, Washington, and Montana. He wore disguises and carried firearms. He passed notes demanding cash. Bank tellers handed over money, and he disappeared before police arrived. The robberies netted him tens of thousands of dollars. He used the money to rent apartments, buy supplies, and maintain his freedom. He lived in small towns and remote areas where nobody knew his face. He grew a beard and changed his appearance. He worked occasional odd jobs for cash. He maintained a low profile except when robbing banks. The Federal Bureau of Investigation tracked the robbery pattern. They knew a single individual was responsible. They suspected it might be Boyce, but they could not confirm it. Then, in August 1981, a crucial break came. On August 20th, 1981, the Federal Bureau of Investigation received a tip. The tip came from Port Angeles, Washington. This is a small city on the Olympic Peninsula, near the Canadian border. A local resident had seen someone matching Christopher Boyce's description. This individual was working at a drive-in restaurant. The tip seemed credible. Federal Bureau of Investigation agents and United States Marshals mobilized immediately. They set up surveillance around Port Angeles. They identified a man living under the name Tony Lester. This man fit Boyce's description. On August 21st, 1981, at approximately 8:20 in the evening, Christopher Boyce sat in his car. He was eating a hamburger outside a restaurant. Boyce did not see the unmarked vehicles surrounding him. He did not notice the federal agents moving into position. A phalanx of United States Marshals appeared from multiple directions. They surrounded the vehicle with weapons drawn. Federal agents shouted commands. Boyce froze. He had been caught. After 19 months of freedom, and after 17 bank robberies, his run was over. He had become one of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's most wanted fugitives. Marshals pulled him from the car and handcuffed him. He did not resist. There was nowhere left to run. The marshals transported him to Seattle for processing. News of his capture made national headlines. The escaped Soviet spy had been caught. The bank robber was back in custody. Christopher Boyce faced new charges on top of his existing 40-year sentence. The bank robbery spree added more prison time. In federal court in 1982, Boyce pleaded guilty to 8 counts of bank robbery. He also pleaded guilty to 1 count of escape from federal custody. Judge Jack Tanner added 28 additional years to his sentence. With good behavior calculations and sentence structuring, he would serve decades more. The escape had not bought him freedom. It had only extended his incarceration. Boyce was transferred to the maximum security United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. This was one of the country's most secure facilities. He would spend years in solitary confinement. The Falcon would never fly free again. The aftermath of the Boyce Lee espionage case reverberated through American intelligence agencies for years. Congress held hearings examining how a 21-year-old with a drug problem and radical views had obtained top-secret clearance. This individual also gained access to sensitive Central Intelligence Agency communications. The investigation revealed systemic failures. TRW's background checks were inadequate. Security protocols in the Black Vault were lax. Document controls were insufficient. Supervision was minimal. The old boys network that got Boyce hired had bypassed normal scrutiny. Multiple senators expressed outrage. They noted that nepotism and casual oversight had enabled one of the Cold War's most damaging security breaches. In April 1985, while imprisoned in Marion, Boyce testified before a Senate committee. This committee was examining espionage threats. He described how easy it had been to steal classified documents. Boyce told the senators that security was a joke. He stated they held drinking parties in the Black Vault. They even used the code Destruction Blender to make banana daiquiris. Boyce further testified that nobody monitored what they took or what they photographed. He explained that the whole system relied on trust, and trust is not security. His testimony led to reforms. Defense contractors implemented stricter background investigations. Document control systems were enhanced. Security cameras were installed in classified work areas. Polygraph examinations became more common for employees with high-level clearances. The Boyce case became a textbook example of insider threats. It is taught to intelligence professionals and security officers. The lessons emphasized include never assuming privilege equals loyalty. Furthermore, never skip thorough vetting. Never rely on connections instead of investigations. These lessons came too late for the secrets already lost, but perhaps prevented future betrayals. Christopher Boyce became a symbol. To some, he represented idealistic youth betrayed by a corrupt government. To others, he exemplified entitled narcissism and treason. Books were written about his case. In 1985, director John Schlesinger released The Falcon and the Snowman. This film starred Timothy Hutton as Boyce and Sean Penn as Lee. The movie dramatized their story and renewed public interest in their crimes. Boyce watched it from his prison cell. He later testified that Hollywood glorified espionage in ways that misled young people about its reality. Andrew Daulton Lee served his life sentence at the federal penitentiary in Lompoc, California. After Boyce's escape, authorities transferred Lee to the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. This was done as a security precaution. Lee spent years fighting for parole. His attorney, a paralegal named Kate Mills, became obsessed with his case. She read about it and believed Lee had been unfairly scapegoated. She argued that his drug addiction deserved consideration. Mills worked tirelessly for 2 decades gathering letters of support. She contacted the original prosecutors and convinced them to write letters supporting Lee's parole. She obtained a letter from Judge Kelleher. The letter stated that Lee had demonstrated rehabilitation. She argued that Lee's role had been secondary. She also contended that Boyce had manipulated him. An addiction had clouded his judgment. In 1998, after 21 years in federal prison, Andrew Daulton Lee was granted parole. He walked out of Terre Haute a changed man. He had earned a dental technician certification. He had stayed drug-free for years. The parole board decided he had become a suitable candidate for supervised release. Lee returned to California and began rebuilding his life. He avoided publicity and worked quietly in the dental field. He tried to leave his espionage past behind. He and Boyce, once inseparable childhood friends, never spoke again. The betrayal and the trials had destroyed their relationship permanently. Kate Mills then turned her attention to freeing Christopher Boyce. She fell in love with him through correspondence. She visited him in prison. They married while he remained incarcerated. Mills wrote to Russian officials requesting documentation about the value of the stolen documents. The Russians sent a statement claiming the intelligence had been useless. Mills used that statement, along with letters from prosecutors and evidence of Boyce's rehabilitation, to support his parole petition. Boyce had used his decades in prison productively. He had taken college courses. He had become a skilled falconer again, working with prison education programs. He had expressed genuine remorse for his crimes. On September 16, 2002, after serving more than 25 years in federal custody, Christopher John Boyce was released on parole. He was 49 years old. He had entered prison as a young man. He emerged middle-aged. Christopher Boyce returned to freedom in a changed world. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The Cold War had ended. The enemy he had aided no longer existed. The secrets he had stolen were historical artifacts. Boyce settled in Central Oregon, where he lives quietly to this day. His passion remains falconry. He trains birds of prey. He studies their behavior. He spends his time in the wilderness pursuing the medieval art that first captivated him as a young man. His ex-wife Kate Mills, now Kate Mills Boyce, remains close to him, though they divorced. In an interview, she stated that his entire life revolved around falconry. She added that he would die with a falcon on his arm. Boyce rarely speaks publicly about his espionage. When he does, he expresses regret and warns others about the consequences of betrayal. In a 2003 interview, he told a reporter there was no thrill in espionage. There was only depression and a hopeless enslavement to an inhuman, uncaring foreign bureaucracy. No American who went to the KGB ever failed to regret it. His advice to anyone tempted to follow his path remains simple. Do not. The price is too high. The damage is too great. The regret never ends. The impact of what he did continues to resonate. Intelligence officials who have studied the case believe the damage was enormous. Richard Stiltz, one of the prosecutors, stated that the stolen satellite intelligence allowed the Soviets to level the playing field in space-based surveillance. Stiltz explained that the United States was far advanced over the Russians. He added that the Soviets leveled the playing field. Stiltz believed that this was probably the most important point. The Real-Light satellite program had to be modified. Operational procedures changed. Billions of dollars in development work was partially compromised. CIA operations mentioned in stolen cables required review and adjustment. The full extent of the damage remains classified to this day. The Boyce Lee case reminds us that national security depends on people, not just on technology. The most sophisticated systems mean nothing if cleared personnel cannot be trusted. One insider with access can do what armies of foreign agents cannot. So, what drove someone like Christopher Boyce to betray everything? Perhaps ideology, greed, or arrogance played a role. The answer seems to be all three mixed with youthful stupidity and a fatal sense of intellectual superiority. Boyce convinced himself his judgment about government corruption was correct. He also believed that exposing American secrets to the Soviets was somehow noble. He wanted money to support his lifestyle. He enjoyed the thrill of beating the system that had given him everything. His judge noted that he was a young man of exceptional intelligence and privilege. He also believed that the rules did not apply to him. That combination of traits created one of the most damaging betrayals of the Cold War. This toxic mixture included brilliance, arrogance, entitlement, and ideology. The story is about a young TRW employee. He gained top-secret clearance at 21. He immediately started smuggling satellite plans to the Soviets. This is ultimately a story about failure. Security systems failed because they did not properly vet him. Supervision failed because it did not monitor him. Personal character failed because it led him to commit treason. Friendship failed because it destroyed 2 lives and countless others. Christopher Boyce now lives as a free man in Oregon. However, he will never escape what he did. Andrew Daulton Lee rebuilt his life, but the label of traitor follows him still. The secrets they stole can never be recovered. The trust they violated can never be fully restored. And the Cold War history they altered can never be rewritten. They were the Falcon and the Snowman. These 2 suburban kids thought they could play spy games with the superpowers of the world. They lost everything in the process and took American security down with them. If you found this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into true cold war espionage cases. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Consider if Christopher Boyce deserved his 40-year sentence. Think about whether security clearances should require more thorough background checks. Ponder what truly motivated him to betray his country. I read every comment. I would love to hear your perspective. Check the description for links to additional resources about the Boyce Lee case. These include declassified FBI documents and trial transcripts. And if you want to learn about more Cold War spy stories, watch my video on the Aldrich Ames case, or the one about the Walker family spy ring. Those cases involve even bigger betrayals and even higher stakes. Thanks for watching. Remember that espionage is not glamorous. It is betrayal with consequences that echo across decades. Christopher Boyce learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. Do not forget to subscribe. I will see you in the next video.